Remember, it was 2 weeks ago today that we had the White House and especially Nikki Haley saying we have seen signs that there's preparations underway in Syria for a new chemical weapons attack, and we will go to war if that happens. We were all very concerned about that happening. I have an update on that today about the sloppy, failed controls on sarin gas at a U.S. Army proving ground. But first, before we do this, let's go back and review what was actually said. And this was 2 weeks ago. The White House warned there were potential preparations for another chemical weapons attack by the Syrian regime. And they said at the time that Assad would face a heavy price if one was carried out. No details were given, no examples, no visuals at all, no proof that this was the case, but threatening this. And we were all very concerned that they might be setting up a stage for a false flag attack. And then Nikki Haley, of course, the ambassador to the military-industrial complex, and coincidentally the UN as well, said any further attacks done to the people of Syria will be blamed on Assad, but also on Russia and Iran, who support him killing his own people. And this, of course, is another example of no motive, because at this point in time, the Syrians were making good progress, as they were before, against ISIS. Let's listen to her, and this is the video that she cut warning about potential war.
The goal is at this point not just to send Assad a message, but to send Russia and Iran a message that if this happens again, we are putting you on notice.
Yeah, we're putting you on notice. That's the dangerous side of the new Cold War with Russia. We can play all these games that CNN and others are doing. Oh, they hacked our election. Well, we don't really mean that they hacked our election. What we mean is that they told the truth about Hillary Clinton, which cost her the election. But this is the dangerous part. This is pushing for a forever war. Let's take a look at the reality of what's going on with this and with the failed Russian narrative. New evidence of both of these today from Zero Hedge. They point out sarin was unaccounted for at a U.S. Army's the U.S. Army's Dugway proving ground. They say a new internal U.S. Army investigation found the most deadly chemical and biological agents known to man were improperly handled and tracked at the Army's Dugway proving ground. They say Dugway is a focus of international headlines. Remember back in 2015, the investigation where they had live anthrax that was shipped to 194 laboratories using commercial carriers like Federal Express. That occurred in 50 states and 9 foreign countries. At the time, many people, they said 24 personnel at Dugway were treated for potential anthrax exposure. An Army Review Board disciplined 10 civilians and military overseers. It included a career-killing reprimand of the base commander, Brigadier General William King. Now, today we have the Army Times pointing out the latest investigation that's been conducted by the Department of Defense Inspector General specifically identified failed protocols and oversight while tracking inventories of sarin nerve agent. And they point out sarin is deadly in extremely small amounts, even at low concentrations. Dugway also handles and tests other well-known nerve agents like VX. Let me tell you, this is very serious because just on the surface, from what the Army Times and the Department of Defense Inspector General said, just on the surface of what we know, this is more incredibly reckless behavior from the place that they say is, quote, the high-risk, zero-defects world of biological select agents program. They say that's ground zero. They're at Dugway Proving Grounds. So these are the people that are creating chemical and biological agents, and they're shipping live anthrax around, and they don't have any, they've got failed protocols in terms of tracking sarin gas and VX gas. But it's also something else to this. Remember, a couple of years ago, we had a whistleblower contact us from an Air Force base saying we have a convoy of nuclear weapons being moved out of here, and this Air Force base presumably does not have nuclear weapons. We aren't told where they're going. And at the same time, we had Lindsey Graham talking to people in South Carolina and saying we could have a nuclear attack right here in our harbor. Same time that was happening. And so here we have a situation where they're talking about how they don't have the ability to safely track and control things like sarin gas. At the same time, we've got Nikki Haley talking about, well, we see preparations underway for a sarin gas attack. Maybe they saw it at their own Army base. Now, this article also points out a 2011 incident involving a misplaced vial of less than 1 milliliter of VX, less than a quarter of a teaspoon. It sent the 800,000-acre base into complete lockdown. It was resolved when they found the VX vial was found to have been mislabeled. We see this also with the CDC. It's very dangerous to have the Center for Disease Control and these Army bases creating these programs and not being able to track and control them adequately. And yet, the timing of this announcement, the timing of Nikki Haley's announcement, as well as this Army report should give us all grave concern that there's something more than just gross incompetence at work here. Meanwhile, as we had Donald Trump meeting last week in Europe, meeting with Vladimir Putin, we had Nikki Haley coming out and saying everybody knows that Russia meddled in our elections, pushing back immediately on President Trump and what he had to say. I would say it's more like backhanding him than pushing back against Donald Trump. She said that right after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had said that Trump brought up the issue of election hacking to President Putin on Friday's G20 summit in Hamburg. Trump, as the Hill points out, has been hesitant to say publicly that Russia meddled in the election. And what he said after that meeting was, quote, "Nobody really knows for sure." Except, of course, our ambassador, Nikki Haley, who was always a never-Trumper, and now she comes out and says, no, everybody knows that they did it, in contradiction to what he had to say. She said, everybody knows they're not just meddling in the United States elections. They're doing this across multiple continents. They're doing this in a way. They're trying to cause chaos within the countries, and we're not going to put up with it. We're going to do something about it. Maybe what we'll do is have a false sarin gas attack so we can really come after the Russians, because that's what Nikki Haley is. She's not the ambassador to the United Nations. She's a spokeswoman for the U.S. military-industrial complex. We need to call her out for what she is. Now, as she's talking about the Russians hacking, let's take a look at this other article from Zero Hedge. New research shows that Guccifer 2.0 files were copied locally, suggesting that the DNC was not hacked by Russians. That would be in line with what we heard from Julian Assange and a former UK ambassador who said that he came into the United States to have a whistleblower within the DNC hand him the information. Julian Assange would not comment on that, but he did say it was not a state actor that gave us this information. Now, this is coming, this is from Zero Hedge via Disobedient Media. They said new meta-analysis has emerged from a document published today by an independent researcher known as the Forensicator, which suggests that files eventually published by Guccifer 2.0 persona were likely initially downloaded by a person with physical access to a computer possibly connected to the internal DNC network. The individual most likely used a USB drive to copy the information. The groundbreaking new analysis irrevocably destroys the Russian hacking narrative and calls the actions of CrowdStrike and the DNC into question. Disobedient Media previously reported CrowdStrike is the only group that has directly analyzed the DNC servers. And of course, it's not just Disobedient Media. Lee Stranahan and I have talked about this. We've talked together about this, the fact that CrowdStrike, and this is being ignored by most of the media, CrowdStrike is the only source on this. So that even when we have the retraction from the New York Times and the Associated Press saying, well, okay, it wasn't 17 agencies, it was 3 or 4 agencies. No, it wasn't. This was a CrowdStrike report that Clapper shopped to a hand-picked group of political sycophants. And as one former intelligence official said, this has the stench of politics to it. Yes, absolutely does. This was a political operation conducted by our intelligence organizations and law enforcement organizations who violated the law. That is the real news, that our intelligence agencies have become politicized and active in this, that the intelligence agencies have become the Watergate burglars. That should make us all very afraid. Far more than anything that Russia could do is the concern of what we see from Homeland Security and these other intelligence agencies getting involved in our elections. They say this was based solely on information ultimately provided by CrowdStrike. This places the company in the unique position of being the only direct source of evidence that a hack ever even occurred. And here's the point, folks. The group's president, Sean Henry, is a retired executive assistant director of the FBI. Surprise, surprise. Like Comey, like Andrew McCabe, who is under multiple investigations for things like violations of the Hatch Act, ethical violations, and other issues. Their co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich, oh, sounds like a Russian guy, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, which is linked to George Soros. And they say on their website, at present it looks a lot like Sean Henry and Dmitry Alperovich, CrowdStrike executives working for either the Hillary campaign or the DNC leadership, were very likely to have been behind the Guccifer 2.0 operation. They point out the document states that files that eventually published in an NGP-VAN by Guccifer 2.0 were first copied to a system located in the Eastern time zone, and they document the technical details of this as to why they say this is the case to some detail. We're not going to go into that verbally here on air, but you can read that report yourself. So the question is, and the question is asked by the American conservatives, so why is Nikki Haley still Trump's UN ambassador? I would say, why was she even picked in the first place as an ever-Trumper? Perhaps it was Donald Trump feeling that he had to offer an olive branch to that side of the Republican Party. But are there no consequences for any of these actions? Are there no consequences for Comey violating the law or Hillary violating the law? Or for somebody like Nikki Haley disputing President Trump, shutting down what he had to say, directly contradicting him immediately? Or for continuing to push this narrative from Hillary and CNN about the Russians? Or, even more importantly, for trying to push us into a shooting war with Russia? Are there no consequences for that? And as this writer, Philip Giraldi from the American Conservative points out, he said he went to a meeting, he was talking to Trump supporters who, he said, like him, had voted for him based on the expectation of a more rational foreign policy. They were suggesting the president's attempts to move in that direction had been sabotaged by officials inside the administration who want to maintain the current warfare state. And that's true. They are trying to foment endless conflict here. And he points out Nikki Haley has been shooting from the lip since she assumed office, but she is firmly in the neocon camp. Remember, she was praised endlessly by people like Lindsay Graham and the Murdoch Group and the National Review and the Weekly Standard. All the never Trump people were saying, oh, this is a great pick. And we see her joined by, of course, H.R. McMaster, Rex Tillerson. Surprisingly, and he puts Mattis in that, I don't see Mattis doing that. As they were pushing this narrative and shooting down a plane in Syria, we had former General Mattis, Defense Secretary James Mattis, come out and say, remember back on June 28th, he said, the U.S. is going to continue to deconflict with Russia. We want to avoid an endless war in Syria. A little breath of fresh air from somebody who perhaps has seen enough war that he doesn't want to continue it. He said the military is pursuing very active deconfliction line, and he says we refuse to get drawn into a fight in the Syrian civil war. I believe that there is a division within the White House that McMaster and Nikki Haley are on the side that are trying to draw us into the Syrian civil war. Mattis is more concerned about stopping ISIS, not about regime change. And so when we look at what's happened with Donald Trump Jr. today, I think it would be right to ask this of the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. Kellyanne Conway went to CNN and talked to Cuomo and said, aren't you embarrassed to talk more about Russia than America? And I would say that should be the case with Nikki Haley and others. Aren't you embarrassed to continue to push this false narrative about Russian hacking? Aren't you embarrassed, or shouldn't you be removed from office for trying to promote a world war, trying to get us involved in a Syrian war? Let's quickly take a look at what happened with Donald Trump Jr. You know, the mainstream media saw this article from Circa and immediately said, oh, he met with a Russian, therefore that proves our narrative. No, it doesn't. First of all, anybody that is doing opposition research, there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's not a crime. The Clinton campaign did that. Remember, they did an entire movie talking about their war room where they went through and looked at opposition news and how they could combat it. And of course, George Stephanopoulos, who's now an anchor at ABC, was a big part of that. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's guilt by association. And who created this meeting? We need to take a look at this. And this was in the very first article, and Drudge has flagged that, saying, is this a setup? I think it's dirty dossier part deux, quite frankly, because we look at this. He pointed out specifically, we have learned, and this is President Trump's legal team, we have learned that the person who sought the meeting is associated with Fusion GPS, a firm which, according to public reports, was retained by Democratic operatives to develop opposition research on the president and which commissioned the phony Christopher Steele dossier. Remember the dirty dossier? That came from Christopher Steele. It came from Fusion GPS, an unregistered Russian agent. And they were also James Comey tried to hire them with the FBI. These are the questions that need to be asked. We need to ask what is going on with our corrupt law enforcement and intelligence agencies that got involved in violation of the law and lied to us about what was going on. That's the real issue. That's really what is involved here with this Donald Trump Jr. thing. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We're selling a product, DNA Force, that is the very best nutraceutical that we can produce. Dr. Group, you took years for you to develop DNA Force for us.
It's been something that I've been working on for a long time, Alex, because I think it's very, very important. What the aging process is when the cell replicates, we lose a little bit of our telomeres. Telomeres are the little cups on the end of our chromosomes.
And when it runs out, you start dying.
We chose the PQQ because it has over 175 different clinical trials. It's one of the most effective substances in the world. It works like an antioxidant. It works to repair nerve growth factor.
So this is a formula to deliver the maximum amount. It's in powder form.
We have so many 5-star reviews. I take this. This is the product that I take.
InfoWarsLife.com, and the profit we make, we fight the globals. We fight the New World Order. Secure your DNA Force today at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139.